It was the realization that biology was programmable. And that for me was a real aha moment. The fact that we have the ability to design living systems with the same intent and precision that we once reserved for software or electronics, that's huge.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Good. How about you, Erum? What's going on?
Oh, a lot. I don't know, Karl. What do we talk about on this podcast?
So usually here on the Grow Everything podcast, we talk about biology as technology, and we interview the industry leaders that are using biology to make the world a better place. And there's so much good stuff going on in the biotechnology industry that doesn't really get reported on in the mainstream, or if it does, most people aren't paying attention to that. So you recently attended a great workshop, which was definitely under the radar. Why don't we talk about that for a minute to give our listeners some insight?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, we live and breathe biotech, and we get invited to some very interesting events. So there's this workshop called the Workshop on Computationally Designed Organisms, and it was held at the University of Vermont, where we explored how programming biology doesn't mean having to edit DNA, but you can train living systems to self-organize, sense, and act. So it's really about what does cellular communication look like and how can it be influenced by its environment, whether it's light, sound, electricity. Some leading thinkers are the head of this computationally designed organism discipline as they're trying to create a discipline around it. So we have Joshua Bongard, who has been studying soft robotics at the University of Vermont, and Mike Levin, who we both have seen him at a lot of different events, and he studies bioelectricity and the influence on being able to coax cells into doing different things. It was fascinating. Stephen Wolfram was there, a gentleman by the name of Carlo Ventura, who was blowing my mind about the influence of light on biology. So photobiomodulation, there's a certain term that he was using, and I was like, what? And there's a for-profit company called Fauna Systems that are looking at how to commercialize computationally designed organisms, or they also call it agentic material. When these living systems are designed to do something, they have agency to make decisions themselves. So it was very mind-blowing. It was like 30 people. You were invited to go. You couldn't go. So I went in your place, and wow, Karl, you would have loved it. You would have been a great person to help bring in the storytelling angle, of course, see how it relates to sci-fi, add some more color to it, because it was very deep, it was very academic, but wow.
Yeah, I mean, I usually don't have FOMO when you go to an event that I don't get to go to, but this was one where I was bummed because computationally designed organisms on the surface just sound so science fiction. Yeah. And then as you dig into it, you see that these researchers are making some really interesting progress. And the fact that they've formed a company to try to figure out how to commercialize these organisms is really interesting. Because on the other hand, these guys are talking about living organisms that are computationally designed, probably for a purpose. Yeah. But I could also see computationally designed organisms as being just something that's agentic AI that lives online and has its own agency. But I guess that's agentic AI. That's not an organism.
Yeah, but similar principles in a way, being able to have agentic AI programmed within an environment, or it's fit for purpose. So whether it's synthetic or silicon-based in computers versus in biology, in our world, in the way that we operate, it's still using computation to design something, whether in computers or in biology.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing. I mean, the applications are just barely emerging, I would say. And so seeing what Fauna System and what these researchers end up doing, I think is going to be super interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'll just give you some quick examples of how this could manifest. One of the things that Josh was saying, imagine if your house had an immune system and would be able to create a healthy environment for you. So it further strengthens your own immune system. So thinking about how even today here in New York City, there's an air quality alert, the heat and pathogens out there. So to be able to have a fortress that is healthy for you is phenomenal, right? Even if you go out there, you get sick, you come back and your environment is what heals you, not drugs. And then,
amazing.
Yeah. The other thing I thought about is the book that we were reading, or you introduced me to, by Annalee Newitt's, The Terraformers. That was a book where they had this bus that was alive. And it's like,
yeah, that's right.
The bus is a transportation system, but it also, in this storyline, is fully agentic, had feelings, could talk with you, could then go into the bus depot and hang out with the other buses and exchange information. I was like, wow, can we start thinking like this? We have a lot of tools, maybe not a fully alive animal, but the conversation is called a workshop on computationally designed organisms. Was about how do we create new organisms? And then if we create new organisms and they're alive, what do we call them? What's the taxonomy? What do we do with these new organisms? And wow, you guys are hearing me. You guys are hearing us talk. I know we blew your minds, so we can reel it back a little bit, but watch this space for more CDO conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I felt super privileged that we got invited to that. And I think they were lucky to have you there because you're there not only with a commercial mind, but also with a storytelling mind, so that as they're thinking about how they tell these stories, I mean, the story is the reality. Mm-hmm. So depending on what they decide or how you or we help them tell these stories, that's really going to define the applications of where these things end up. But I love the home immune system and I love this space. Mm-hmm. The other space that we have been touching a lot upon has been longevity, mm-hmm. biotech and aging, which seems to be a space that gets a good amount of money. Let's just talk about this a little bit because I have one that I really want to talk about when it comes to regeneration.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about it. I mean, I wanted to point this out because there's been a lot of events happening in this space. There's obviously Brian Johnson has his Don't Die Summit talking about the interventions that he's been exploring. I'm sure he looks at other ones out there and brings everyone together. This week, there's actually a Biotech Aging NYC event that's going to have 4 panels. Yours truly will be moderating one of them to look at biomarkers. How can pharma look at longevity and biomarkers when it comes to increasing our health spans, not just lifespans. So this isn't about living forever, which is what the Brian Johnson world talks about, or at least that's a controversy surrounding it. Oh, this guy wants to live forever. This isn't about that. When it comes to longevity, when we're talking to biotech practitioners and the people that are going to be attending this coming event, it's about how do we stay vibrant and active until we're 95 and then just have a short amount of years where we're maybe less mobile and have aging defects, I guess you can say, because there's this whole body of work that's pointing at aging as a disease. And we will talk about this more because we have some amazing guests coming up that are working with these leading thinkers. And I'll be sure to give a summary after this event next week. So stay tuned for the next episode. But there's a lot and it's been so popular. I do also want to mention we talked about this at length in previous episodes. So we had Nicholas Enzinger, who is looking at longevity biotech, new models of regulation and new ways of accelerating biotech. So definitely listen to that. And then, of course, we had Dr. Shelby come on and talk about the biohacking demo day they had at Compound, and Union Square Ventures collaborated on it. So I would recommend listening to those episodes. But Karl, tell us, what's on your mind?
I mean, so we talk a lot about biotech beauty. Biotech beauty is a thing. And we've seen that major corporations like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder are investing in longevity solutions, and longevity is something that does get talked a lot about in the beauty space. And those conversations are nuanced. I mean, you might see the marketing terms, regenerate this or regrow that, and you have to read between the lines and check the label, especially look for things that are clinically validated. And again, we're going to have some guests talk about this soon. But there was this news last week that really just blew my mind because it was about these South American snails that can regrow their eyes after a month. So how do they do that? They lose an eye in the wild. They basically cut the wound off. Then you have these cells that migrate there. That triggers a bunch of gene activity, and those genes differentiate, and basically 15 days later, they've regrown an eye. Now, the scientists don't know if that eye actually functions. That's going to be the next iteration of this research. But it's very important because eyes are actually one of the first things that form as a human. I'm pretty sure I might be wrong. Listeners, please correct me. I believe your eyes are the size that they will always be when you're born. Your head grows around your eyes. and the number of connections between your eyes and your brain. I think the greatest number of connections happen in that kind of optical nerve stack. Again, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
But I just was like blown away by this South American snails that are able to regrow their eyes and this research that's going on to really explore how do they do this, because that has profound implications going forward.
So two things. One is the eye also has its own isolated immune system, I discovered recently.
There you go.
And then also, this was one of the biggest topics in this workshop for computationally designed organisms, because the regrowth of tissues and arms and eyes, how does that happen, right? And there is a cellular communication that happens, and there's a memory within cells. Some of it's part of the brain, but it's just this decentralized way of communicating that the cells that are near the point where the arm is cut off or the eye is cut off, they know how to regenerate somehow. So this is an investigation, but they also know when to stop.
Right.
They know to create this structure. And it's like, what is that? How does it happen? Because is it within their DNA? Are there instructions on that level? Or is it something else? And I was looking at the difference between our immune system and the immune system of an axolotl, which is an amphibian. It's known to have regenerative properties because a lot of scientists have studied them, and they study like they cut their arms off and like grows back. It's like, okay, why? But yes, so it's so interesting that you brought this up, because it does dovetail into this computationally designed organism workshop, but also just biotech innovation as a whole, as toolkits, not only for researchers and scientists, but how do we take it into commercial applications? How do we bring it into larger organizations so that they can commercialize it and bring it to the market so we can use it in our daily lives?
Yeah, and I'll just say, I can't remember what science fiction series it was in, maybe The Expanse, where some dude loses an arm and then they put a spray on it and he regrows his arm.
Yeah.
So science fiction has been thinking about this for a long time. It's one of those tropes, but we're probably a few years away from there, but the research is underway. Stay tuned, because hopefully we can be the first ones to report on when someone regenerates a finger or a toe or a whole limb. But I think it's coming.
So commercialization is the topic of today's conversation. We have an amazing guest today, Richard Traherne of Capgemini and previously of Cambridge Consultants. And Capgemini, we've mentioned a few times. They had an amazing report called Unlocking the Power of Engineering Biology. Maybe they'll have one on computationally designed organisms in a few years. We don't know. That'd be awesome. But Karl, you actually have known Capgemini for a while. They've written reports. You've brought them to me and said, Erum, you have to read this. It's part of your homework. It's part of working at Messaging Lab. Tell us your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this report that Capgemini put out at the beginning of 2025. It's a pretty meaty, substantial report, and we will put it in the show notes. And we've mentioned it a number of times. And we were introduced to Richard and his team right after the report came out. And so we have talked to Richard a couple of times. And then we saw him at Symbio Beta, had the chance to really spend time with him, get to know him. And of course, it made sense for us to bring him here onto the Grow Everything podcast. So we'll talk about the report after we listen to Richard. But hey, listeners, we did have some technical issues when we were recording this podcast. So we apologize if there's places where it jumps. I know we lost Erum during part of it. Please excuse us. It hasn't happened before, and we're trying to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So with that, let's let Richard take it away. Richard Traherne, we are so glad to have you here on the Grow Everything podcast.
Hi, Karl and Erum. Really great to see you again, and I'm delighted to be on the pod.
Great. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with Capgemini and Cambridge Consultants, could you please give us some background on what you do and how you fit into biotechnology?
Yeah, so Capgemini is a global professional services company. It's big, 350,000 people worldwide, about $24 billion in revenue. And Capgemini invents specifically is the innovation and business transformation arm of that. And it's the home to a specialist set of deep innovation brands. And one of those is Cambridge Consultants, CC. And it's often referred to as a parent of the Cambridge UK high-tech cluster. So in West Coast terms, the UK Silicon Fen. And that's the deep science and technology engine of Capgemini. And that's where we've built our practical engineering biology lab capability. And it's a capability we've been growing for about 10 years now. It augments our other physical and digital capabilities. In terms of our role in bioengineering in the broader sense, in simple terms, we help clients in a very practical way to discover, develop, and launch commercially successful biosolutions. The foundation of that work is our AI-driven labs based in Cambridge, agentic techniques, and behind that a multidisciplinary team across science, tech, digital and engineering. And the center of the value that they deliver to clients is accelerating biodevelopment and using next generation lab approaches, so lab in loop and automated DPTL cycles and things like that, by improving predictability. So predictability is the center of what they're driving for, to basically reduce time and cost. So for a company new to bio, it's helping them at the start of the journey, what they can do, the business case, economic analysis, and then helping them on the journey to develop it. And for those already active, that's an interesting one because it's working with them to understand their existing traditional process and injecting in new techniques around AI, automation, digital platforms, and so on to help them accelerate and turn that into a next-gen capability. So the big differentiator I think we have is that we bring an outside-in perspective. We try to inject techniques that we're using in other industries to disrupt traditional thinking. And also, I think we're unusual in the sense that we do that end-to-end from ambition in a boardroom all the way to launch, and outside the lab in areas like policy, regulation, sustainability analysis, brand reinvention, things like that. All of the things that you need to make that a success from a business and commercial perspective.
Yeah, I love that, and absolutely necessary. It is such a huge slog to bring an ambitious idea into a commercial ready product, and to have an organization like yours that can provide all that support is critical. I really appreciate your background, and I love when people have different experiences because there's always these different levels of convergence. So your career has moved from wireless innovation to deep tech, and now you're in the world of engineering biology. So what connected the dots for you? What pulled you toward biology as a next frontier?
Yeah, it's a great question, Erum, because at first glance, wireless systems and biology might seem worlds apart. I suppose for me, there's been a common thread that's been about the ability to model and predict complex systems to make them commercially viable. So back in the days when I was actually on the bench doing wireless, we pushed the limits of physics so that radio signals could travel long distances, be reflected off multiple surfaces and still get to the other end in one piece at a tiny signal level, wrapped with encryption and for security. Whether that was personal wireless headphones or global satellite communication networks, the same problem existed. And interestingly, my specialism was around high frequency electronics, so radio frequency electronics. And unlike digital and low frequency, where you're trying to use the inherent properties of a radio wave to fly through the air from A to B, you're trying to harness that because that's the very property that doesn't want to keep it on the track of a circuit board. So the physical properties of the electronics become part of the design. It's not just a simple low frequency design problem. So the CAD modeling was much harder. And it was one of the later areas of electronics to be modeled at a sophisticated level. And so I think there are huge parallels to biotech with its huge complexities, orders of magnitude more complex than that, about how to turn what's traditionally been an empirical, experimental domain into a predictable, commercially viable process. In terms of my attraction towards engineering biology, I would say that it's centered on a belief that it really is a new industrial revolution. It's not just hype. Look at the platform potential from it. For me personally, being relatively new to it, it was the realization that biology was programmable, and that was a real aha moment. The fact that we have the ability to design living systems with the same intent and precision that we once reserved for software or electronics. That's huge. I mean, that's a seismic shift in capability. And the other thing, to close on that question, I'd say that from a societal perspective, I have a strong support for any view that our current approaches are failing to win the race, whether that's climate crisis, national resource constraints, health challenges. So biology is not just an innovation or a nice idea or a handy thing to use. It's actually a necessity.
Yeah, I think that's great, Richard. So you touched on Silicon Valley, and in Silicon Valley, A16Z, they say software is eating the world, whereas we say biology is eating the world. How do you see biology shifting from niche innovation to being core infrastructure across industries?
Yeah, so it's a shift that I definitely recognize, and it's happening, I think, more widely than most of us expected, perhaps. It's biology is no longer confined to pharma world or academia. It's becoming, as you're saying, that foundational layer for innovation across industries, from materials to energy, food, fashion, even data storage. At Capgemini, like all professional services companies, we have clients that span those industries. It's quite a useful position to become a barometer for what's going on and where the industries are heading. So I can comment on that, but also you've reminded me that last year we commissioned a report with our Capgemini Research Institute, who surveyed 1,100 corporate executives and 500 startups. And we wanted to go further than some of the high-level reports that had been produced before, trillion-dollar industry and all of that. We wanted to establish what was happening in the industry in more tangible terms. And some stats that I recall from that were that 96% of organizations, and bear in mind, those 1,100 corporate execs weren't bio companies. These were across industries. 96% of the respondents said that they were already exploring biosolutions in one way or another. And half of those were engaged in active experimentation or beyond. And then close to 70% said that they were planning to increase their investment in the next 2 to 5 years, in other words, short term. And that's not fringe, that's mainstream. So we published that report as time is now, and it's become our mantra in many ways with clients to say, hey, you've got to take notice of this because it is a new platform. It's changing the way we're thinking about innovating. Biology is becoming an infrastructure because it offers something that's unique. It's the ability to create sustainable, high-performance solutions that traditional engineering and also manufacturing just can't match.
Yeah. I love that. I love that report. We use it all the time in our conversations with potential clients and our existing clients because it really pointed to something really important that you're saying, not fringe, it's happening, people want it, and they want to be able to do it right. They need the resources to be able to make the decisions. And well, first plan some scenarios, like what resources do they have? Do they have the capital? Will they make the investment in order to biologize? We like to use that word. Biologize their supply chains or their production of their goods. So it's a great report. We'll definitely link to it in the show notes. So if people have not read it, it's something you must read, no matter what industry you're working in. You guys have been doing such great work at Capgemini Invent, and at Capgemini, you led the Next Frontiers initiative, which fuses design, deep tech, science. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does a breakthrough innovation look like when those disciplines align?
Yeah, I love the fact you frame that around the multidisciplinary aspect, because I think that's a massive part of how we're going to succeed with biology. And certainly for us, it's a huge theme and a focus at Capgemini. We work hard to bring together disciplines to avoid thinking in the traditional silo. So we've got biologists and chemists and data scientists and electronics engineers and sensing engineers and so on, all sitting together in our labs and seeing the magic happen at the intersections, or I should say maybe in the gaps, is what is so amazing. Years ago, I remember sitting in a brainstorm. This was an entirely different area. It was next generation coffee machines for kitchens, and there was a cleaning problem. And for most of the hour, we sat there and a lot of interesting ideas emerged. And then suddenly, a very quiet person in the corner who was an ultrasonics expert spoke up and there we had the answer. Suddenly the cleaning technique became clear. And so it was a really good example of how when you bring in those unexpected disciplines, suddenly you can make a breakthrough. So in Next Frontiers, we deliberately bring together designers, scientists, engineers across that spectrum, but also market experts who have seen how other markets have evolved and can translate some of that across. So we're not just trying to prove existing methods, but invent new ones. And if I think about our engineering biology work, that's happened quite a lot in all of the areas that we've worked in. The first area, I suppose, is in generative AI and large language models. So we have developed specialist LLMs that act on curated data sets, and that's needed close collaboration. We wanted curated data sets because if you do that, you can radically reduce the amount of data and training that you need. So you don't have to rely on brute force methods. That requires the biologists to be there with the data scientists and everybody else to figure out how to do that. It allowed us to find breakthrough candidates that had beaten the performance of years of research of particular candidates in a matter of days. One of the examples is a cutinase enzyme that was used to break down PET plastic. We used 99% less data than we would have done using traditional AI techniques. And then we're moving on to develop our own foundational model so that organizations can access that and give them a protected AI approach and give them a differentiated position rather than using public models. And again, that needs expertise across bio, platform design, as well as the data science. In terms of bringing it alive, another example I can point to is in high throughput screening. So most of our customers are looking to do the scale up and the scale down more effectively, and they're wanting to bring real world conditions into the lab environment so that they can produce organisms that perform better in the real world. There we've got high throughput screening rigs that bring those conditions in so that we can control things like aeration and real-time biomass and pH and DOE, and that needs fluidics engineers and sensor physicists and electronics engineers to be able to produce something that's in a microtiter rig well plate format that can be used in a lab in traditional incubators and so on, and is just part of the process.
That's amazing.
I could carry on for a long time. You've hit on a really important thing for us, that multidisciplinary aspect is the key to it. And then the icing on the cake is when you bring in those other skills around it. I haven't mentioned Frog, who's a sister organisation to Cambridge Consultants in the group. They're a design and business reinvention specialist. So they're bringing in the brand and reinvention capability and policy and regulatory insights that can help clients to wrap those disciplines around the science and the tech even. So I think it's a layered problem, but I love that multidisciplinary focus.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was thinking about how I was in Spain and the Tour de France was on TV. And you guys, Capgemini, are one of the sponsors. And I was thinking, well, where is biology applied in the Tour de France? But it's not really about biology in the Tour de France. It's these cyclists who are really mutants, these guys who are able to ride 100 miles every day for a month. They're abnormal people, and we love them for being that kind of abnormal. But you touched on a couple of different ideas. What industries do you see right now being the most active in exploring bio-based solutions? If you can reveal that and what products are actually getting off the ground, I think that would be really helpful.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think the landscape has quite a complex complexion and it's ever changing. And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that it is always going to be highly dependent on which industries are being successful in being supported by new legislation and incentives. And actually, again, going back to my wireless background, I remember that in the early days, in fact, I'm showing my age here, this isn't the 6G, 5G, but the kind of the 1G, where Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and other short-range technologies were being developed, and they were trundling along, and there was a lot of debate about which the winners were going to be, and a lot of names that I could mention that you won't recognize because they fell by the wayside. There weren't any clear winners in terms of volume, and then technology breakthroughs like implementing Bluetooth on a single ultra-low cost CMOS chip. Actually, that was a Cambridge Consultants breakthrough with their spin-out Cambridge Silicon Radio, and also things like hands-free driving laws coming in, which suddenly bootstrapped the market into action because there was suddenly volume, and it gave, if you like, the ChatGPT moments. I listened to one of your previous episodes, and I remember you talking about mRNA vaccines during COVID, regrettably being a ChatGPT moment. So each industry needs that kind of stimulus, I think. But to answer your question, if I think across the industries, consumer products, personal care, food ingredients, and so on, that has the advantage of really strong consumer pull from a sustainability perspective. And that's a real boon. And I think we're seeing strong interest, and interestingly, at the lab of the future level. So it's not necessarily a spot engineering biology problem, but a next generation lab challenge, next generation R&D. Industrials like chemicals, materials, and agri-tech and things like that, I think they're strong in volume, but the margins are typically low, and the incentives aren't always heavily aligned to de-incentivize legacy petrochemically based options. So we're seeing, I would say, patchy traction, some highlights, but some lowlights as well. And the high spots are the platform products that can be the foundation for many different forms of biosolutions, so muconic acids of the world and other platform products like that. And then pharma, of course, which is undoubtedly the most invested and the most bio-literate, but also has the most legacy to overcome. So there we're finding that we've got clients who are well equipped and they're literate, but using quite traditional methods and methods which are heavily invested. So there's a lot of inertia in them, and they need a lot of support internally to convince the business to pivot to alternative methods. But of course, the returns are huge, so cutting discovery costs is worth it. And then energy and fuels, where I'd say, again, patchy at the moment, partly due to incentives, but a very varied landscape, and each sector is looking for its on switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you shared all the different sectors. Some of them are incumbents when it comes to leveraging biology, but might have old ways of doing things. Some are completely new to biology. They know they have to do something, but they don't know where to start. So when you're talking to your clients, where do you see that they usually get stuck when it comes to implementing biology or biologizing? And how do you help them move forward to get unstuck?
Yeah. So for some of our clients, they can be really sophisticated in engineering or digital or manufacturing. When it comes to biology, for them, it seems like they're stepping into a different universe in many ways. So fundamentally, one of the biggest sticking points, of course, is that biology doesn't behave like code or machines out of the box. We're in the process of making it more predictable. So it's living, dynamic, it's unpredictable. And at the highest level, at the fundamental level, I would say the first overarching challenge is to build confidence in clients, because planning and budgeting is hard, making it more of a honed business process like traditional technologies. And I would say if we go beyond that, there's three areas possibly that I can think of. The first is fundamentally understanding what biology can do for the business, not just in theory, but supported by good analysis, techno-economic analysis of the route to market, the supply chain changes, a quantified business plan. So you're turning that business or boardroom discussion into we're confident to proceed, rather than, well, it seems the right thing to do, but the business plan seems a bit flaky, or we've got some gaps or some things we don't understand. We're confident to proceed. Once we're past that stage, it's how can you make that discovery and development process cost effective, whether that's accelerating the discovery process, whether it's about speeding up screening, whether it's about making scale up more predictable, employing computational fluid dynamic techniques to simulate your bioreactors so that you can scale up confidently and without iterating and things like that. The other one we're seeing, particularly in the consumer market, is how do you bring the product level parameters, the sensorial performance or other product level performance parameters back into the lab? How do you have biomarkers or signatures that you can look for at the lab level that give you confidence that once you've gone through those stages, which become more expensive as you step through them, you're going to get a good result at the end. So I'd say fundamentally our role is about helping clients to move forward with confidence, demystifying the science, translating it into a language that resonates with their business. For me, the most exciting moment is when a client sees that. They see that biology isn't a problematic science challenge, it's a platform, and that they can invest confidently in it and gain advantage across a whole load of future business areas.
That's great, Richard. I love hearing that. As you probably know from listening to us at the Grow Everything podcast, we do talk about how biology is an essential infrastructure for the bioeconomy and for the economy at large. But let us know, what does that look like from a scaling point of view? What does it take for your clients to understand what scaling look like, even from a storytelling point of view?
Yeah, and there's a lot in there. And I think it's a really important question because biology doesn't scale and become successful in a well plate. If we want a thriving bioeconomy globally at scale, we've got so much to solve around the biology and the ecosystem. So I mentioned earlier that we're partners to the World Economic Forum for their Bioeconomy initiative, and I'd love to give a shout out to Bryn Stanton, who leads that and is driving forward the thinking at the bioeconomy level and the community with Novo and Regeneron and DSM and Serbia, C4IR and others. I'd say on the infrastructure part of the question, biology needs a different supply chain. You're not just shipping molecules, you're growing them. So that means biomanufacturing hubs, fermentation capacity, cold chains, the regulatory frameworks that go around that, and all of that's keeping up with innovation. Because one of the challenges that we see is that we need innovative and agile approaches to getting that set up to bootstrap the industry. And right now, I'd say that's a bottleneck. So agile piloting facilities, entrepreneurially minded regulatory bodies like the new Regulatory Innovation Office in the UK led by Lord David Willits, things like that stimulate progress quickly. And on the business model side, many bio-based solutions don't fit neatly into existing categories. They might be more sustainable, but they're not always cheaper, at least not yet until we've solved some of the other problems. We know the 10x rule, that a disruptive product needs to be perhaps 3 times better, 3 times cheaper. So overall, it's 10 times better in order that it disrupts an incumbent. What we try and do is help clients think creatively about how they can unlock that. How can meaningful performance be enhanced that will make a difference in that equation? Or how can you monetize an aspect like carbon savings? Or how do you partner with a brand that can value and amplify the story? And can you start in a premium niche and scale from there? So that business model part of your question, I think, is a key one. And it's often quite difficult because it does require, again, a very different perspective to the science. And you mentioned storytelling, and this is where kudos to you guys, because as you well know, this is huge. I think your work is so valuable in this regard. Biology is invisible to most people. If you're making leather from mushrooms or the extreme, talking about bringing extinct animals back to life, you've got to bring people along that journey. They've got to understand why that's a good thing to do, what it means to them personally and societally. We hear debates about whether synthetic biology or engineering biology are the right label when, of course, we know that, in fact, both are pretty awful in general terms. And also failing to employ that benefit of harnessing the power of nature and switching on the positive. So consumers, individuals, investors, regulators, governments, everybody needs to understand not just what it is, but why it matters For us, the best bio companies are the great storytellers. And I'm sure you've been behind many of them, but those that make the science and the impact tangible and personal and make the future feel possible are the ones that are going to succeed and take people on that journey. We're lucky to have Frog in our family because they also are in the storytelling area, but also experts at brand design and brand reinvention to harness that set of messages in brands and help companies reinvent themselves in that regard. So yeah, the work that John Cumbers at SymBioBeta, Dick Kitney, Paul Fremont at Symbicity and others to bring the community together to get us to think about that, I think it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to highlight, you mentioned Lord David Willits, who was at SymBioBeta this year. And I just really appreciated that he was on stage talking about how open and how much he will be advocating for the development of the bioeconomy in the UK. And he was saying all the right things. Maybe I would say Michael Kouros of DARPA from the US. I mean, he was doing a bit of that. But I think having government involved and advocate for it, giving those green lights for people to say, yes, it's okay. Yes, we're supporting them, and creating the regulatory pathway or hopefully financial incentives to be able to build a bioeconomy is super important. And I just want to make sure that's not understated and we're all hearing that.
Richard, could you please talk about the intersection of AI and biology or AI and biotechnology? How are you seeing AI actually deliver business value as a catalyst for predictability or acceleration? You mentioned that you guys have your own language biological models that you're using, but I'm really curious how that potentially impacts the business.
So a while ago, I first heard that there were more DNA combinations in the universe than atoms on Earth, which blew my mind as I thought an atom was really the lowest common denominator of what we had around us. So to design new biological solutions, AI isn't a nice to have, it's essential. And if we want to make it as predictable as our electronic and software technologies, it still needs to go a long way. So quantum computing needs to hurry up. So we see very real and very tangible value in the use of AI in breaking down design cycles, transforming a domain that was slow and experimental in one that you can predict, and so on. How a protein will fold in silico before you step into the lab. And that means for us drastically reducing the design space, having fewer failed experiments, faster iteration, lower costs. And that's a game changer for companies who are trying to produce bio-based chemicals or materials at scale. And I loved hearing Andrew Phillips at SymBioBeta, at Sanofi, talking about his moonshot AI platform plans. And certainly that's a very common theme across our clients, helping them to bring generative techniques into the lab in order that we can accelerate the process from start to finish. And beyond the lab, AI is helping with supply chain modeling, regulatory strategy, market forecasting, all of which are critical for scaling those bio-based businesses. So yeah, I mean, for us, there's a real value and a substance in the use of AI. But the key is not to treat it as, if you like, a replacement digital tool, but to create and operate it combined with deep domain expertise, so that you've got a range of domain experts feeding it so that you've got meaningful insight from it. You've got curation of the data so that you can reduce the challenge of feeding and deploying it. And I think that's something that separates us from some of our peers in the sense that we have those practical capabilities in the lab that we can bring to bear on the AI. So we're not just an AI company that with some people with backgrounds in the areas, we have practitioners that are using it on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. Listeners to the podcast have heard me talk about the impact of AI on biology. We say that AI is the language of biology the same way that math is a language of physics. And we even go further saying that as AI researchers start to understand the complexity of biology and the fact that you have an innumerable number of processes happening in a cell at any given time and the amount of data that is necessary to process that, biology is really going to have a huge impact on the way chips are designed, the way digital storage is designed, all those things. Thank you to biology. Let's switch gears a little bit, Richard, and let's talk about sustainability since you've worked in sustainability for a long while. How is sustainability evolving with AI, with synthetic biology, and how's it showing up in your work today?
Yes, I mean, sustainability is an interesting topic in relation to biotech because traditionally sustainability used to be about doing less harm, reducing emissions, cutting waste, improving efficiency, and so on. But with engineering biology, we've got the ability to shift that towards regenerative innovation and sustainability from that perspective. So it's not just about minimizing impact, it's about redesigning systems to be inherently sustainable from the ground up. And I think that's a really key distinction. I think in the areas that we're working in within engineering biology, one of the key principles that we try to keep in the center of our minds is that sustainability alone isn't enough. For commercially driven organizations, it's perhaps even just table stakes, but it needs to be supported by better product performance, cost, and so on. In the World Economic Forum work that we're doing, there's a little piece of work looking at what value means in the value chain to reinforce that. And also going back to that Capgemini Research Institute report we were talking about, one of the feedbacks from that was that over 70% of the executives that were interviewed believed that biosolutions had the potential to significantly accelerate progress towards their sustainability goals. So I think it's definitely recognized as a key driver. So we help clients to model complex ecosystems, the supply chains for circularity, predict the environmental impacts of new materials before they're made. But with engineering biology, we can help clients create new materials and new molecules that are biodegradable. And the challenge that we face pretty quickly is that even for companies that are used to undertaking sustainability life cycle analyses for traditional product areas, they struggle to understand how to do that for a bio solution because the models are different. They may not have the data that they need to feed the model. So it's an entirely different question. And it also shows up in how we're helping clients to rethink their portfolios. Instead of asking, how do we make this thing greener? We're asking, what would this look like if it were bio-native from the start? And how does that fundamentally affect your business? And that opens up entirely new possibilities across performance, sustainability, resilience, and so on. Your question reminds me of hearing Amy Trejo from Procter & Gamble at a recent event talking about her activities within P&G around how to drive that business case through the organization in a way that is quantified and people can buy into it and agree that it's a good thing to do. I think that's a really important topic, and it's one that companies struggle with.
Yeah, and I would think it would be somewhat challenging because on the one hand, you've got the innovators. And you hit the nail on the head when you said engineering biology allows us to be generative, not just creating better performing products, but actually we can look at things from the beginning of the product being bio-native. When we look at a product being bio-native from the beginning, it impacts the entire life cycle of that product. And I think that across an enterprise, it's probably going to be very challenging, at least for now. But I love hearing Amy Trejo and the team at P&G talk about it. I love hearing that you at Cambridge Consultants are talking about it. And now you're leading this Capgemini Frontier division, and you're helping incubate these breakthrough technologies. What's one project you've worked on that has really shaped how you think about innovation today?
Well, that's a great question. I suppose one of the projects that really sticks in my mind, it was across actually a couple of decades relationship with a client, Iridium Communications, and they're unique. They're the only fully global operator of satellite communications in the world. They've got a satellite constellation that's 500 miles up in the sky. The satellites travel at 17,000 miles an hour, and it forms this canopy of connectivity around the globe. And we developed their ground-based equipment of modems and handsets and things like that, and also the network infrastructure, the carrier-grade network infrastructure that received all the calls. But basically, one day I got into the office and I heard a story that had been described using the Iridium system. And it was an ex-astronaut who'd just come down from a stint in the International Space Station. And most astronauts, he'd had to reacclimatize to Earth, and he'd taken 6 months to do that, but then got bored because he was an astronaut. He said, well, I'm going to do a charity climb of Everest. So he did the climb. And as we all know, you can't predict when you're going to get to the summit. He got to the penultimate point and then waited for the weather to clear and then got to the top. He noticed that when he got to the top, it was the birthday of his colleague who was still up there in the space station. So he pulled out one of these Iridium phones and he dialed his number. And to get to the space station, his call went from the top of Everest up 500 miles, across 2 satellite cross connections until it was over Tempe, Arizona, down to Iridium's ground station, across to NASA's ground station, from there up to NASA's spreader satellite that spreads communications up in space, and then from that satellite out to the International Space Station. And he stood on the top of Mount Everest singing happy birthday with a group of Sherpas around him to his colleague at the International Space Station.
Unreal.
And so, I mean, when I heard that story, I thought, first of all, that's why I got into science and technology and engineering. And to answer your question, I look back and I often tell that story because it does shape how I think about innovation, because that system requires you to pull every ounce of physical capacity out of the world to get the signals to do what they need to do across those distances. And bear in mind, that's a low volume application. It doesn't have the volumes of mainstream mobile communication. So being really clever with how you use your resources and your electronics and digital technologies and so on. The whole aspect of, well, if you can do that in space, we can do it on the ground. So it often makes me think, if we can do that, then we can solve some of these nearer term problems that we have in front of us.
I love that story. I think I maybe mentioned that we had been in rural Spain near the Picos de Europa, and we were very dependent on a Starlink link to be able to connect to wireless. And I did notice that the link didn't work so well when the clouds had covered the mountain. And I don't know if that was a function of Starlink or if it was just something that hadn't been wired, but the technology is amazing. And I think that rural areas that have no internet are really going to benefit from technologies like Starlink and those that follow that project signals directly into the sky.
Yeah, it's an amazing set of technologies, and the Iridium system is particularly strong in that regard. As long as you can see the sky, you'll get through.
All right, Richard. Well, if we get this right, if engineered biology scales with intention, what does a world look like in 10 years? What systems, behaviors, or industries might be transformed?
Okay, well, Karl, as long as you promise not to play this back to me in 10 years, I'll give you an answer.
No problem. It'll be fun to play it back for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think with engineering biology, the world has the potential to look radically different in 10 years. We're talking, if we get this right, as you say, about a shift to biology becoming a core part of how we make things, how we move, how we live. I suppose what excites me personally about that is the sheer scope. Everything from materials are going to be grown instead of mined, and packaging that composts like leaves, and proteins from air and electricity, and cities with decentralized biomanufacturing hubs that produce everything from food to pharmaceuticals. So very much democratizing many of the processes and supply chains that we have around us today. You and I know that's not science fiction, that we're seeing the seeds of that starting today. So it's within our grasp. And I think that's really enticing and really exciting. And you mentioned behaviors briefly. I think behaviors is a key ingredient, isn't it? Because behaviors need to and will shift. When we think back to the advent of all of the big technology steps, whether it's steam or electricity or anything else, behavioral shifts occurred and were needed. I'd anticipate that as consumers, we're going to be expecting products not just to be sustainable, but bio-native in that regard. Supply chains we're going to expect to be shorter, smarter, more resilient. And that, of course, is a great response to some of the current geopolitical challenges that we've got at the moment. And industries from fashion to construction redefined in what biology makes possible in terms of the common everyday commodities we have around us, fabrics, dyes, materials. I suppose to answer your question directly, I think the biggest change I would see is that transformation being systemic. If we can scale with intention, biology won't just be a tool, it'll be a design principle. We'll be designing economies that are circular by default. We'll be designing innovation ecosystems that are inclusive and distributed and harnessing the power of nature to do that. And that's on our planet, and to the extent that we need to explore further planetary homes in the future of planets beyond. So the scale of it's immense. For me, that's the opportunity. And I think it's why the basic choices that we make now about infrastructure, policy, education, and some of these broader topics matter so much.
All right, Richard. So we've recently added this portion to our podcast where we ask a series of quickfire questions. So let me ask you, what technology is being overhyped right now?
Quantum, I'm going to say, huge potential, but overhyped in terms of capability today. But watch that space.
What's more exciting to you, starting from scratch or scale up?
Ooh, that's really tricky because am I allowed both? Because I think realizing a disruptive breakthrough technology, but then seeing it hit volume and success in the real world, those two things really get me going.
What's your favorite unexpected mashup of science and design?
So I think on the design side, perhaps biotextiles and dyes, seeing those developed from microbes walking down a catwalk in a haute couture fashion house. And maybe also the bioluminescence. I remember seeing the demos from Lightbow and others, and I think they're very cool.
All right. Well, Richard Traherne of Capgemini, Cambridge Consultants, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. Sorry, Rum had to drop in the middle of it. Like I said, we had some technical issues, but we really are happy that you came on, and we're going to look forward to seeing you around in conferences and speaking to you again here as things progress at Capgemini, Cambridge Consultants, because we think your point of view is very important.
Great, Karl. And I really appreciate being on. And again, fantastic work that you guys are doing. And I look forward to the next podcast.
Thank you again.
Karl, well, sorry I had to jump off there. I mean, my internet went down. That's my bad for having Spectrum, but I remedied that and I'm getting Verizon Fios. So small plug for Verizon. But what do you think of that episode? I mean, wow, Richard, what a great thought partner.
Yeah, Richard is great. And there's so much to say about him, the interview, the report, and what's happening in the United Kingdom. The UK has been a leader in synthetic biology specifically, and they've been making some really nice investments and starting to attract some American talent to go over there, especially with the kind of question mark around research funding in the United States. That said, the UK has outsized influence across the rest of the world. And Richard's background is so interesting, given that he comes from the world of wireless, radio waves, electronics. And I think there's a lot of people that we know that have either come into biotech or that we've talked to that have come out of either computation or electronics or engineering to apply that engineering mindset to biotechnology and biology. And I think the industry benefits from that kind of convergence. We need more thinkers who are going to come in with a different point of view, because that's going to advance this field even faster. And it is also going to demystify it for the people who really don't have any insight into what biotechnology is. What did you think, Erum? I'm sorry that you dropped off in the middle of it.
Yeah, I know. I was really frustrated because I really enjoyed speaking with Richard. This was our time because we've been going back and forth, and I was really excited to have him on and regret that. But you picked it up, and of course, you're a pro, and Richard's so great to listen to, besides the British accent, of course. I mean, we all love that. Americans love that. But also, I mean, he's just very thoughtful, right? I love analogies. So when he was talking about his background and how it applied to biology and biotechnology, it's just a wonderful way to bridge disciplines because we're in this era of deep technical convergence. So to be able to create connections between different disciplines is super important. It's really going to help companies get ahead. And it's organizations or companies like Capgemini are super important. There's these large companies that have all the capabilities, but sometimes are just so focused on their current operations because they need to focus on continuing to generate revenue that they might miss innovation or might take them a while to adopt innovation. So when consultants like Capgemini, or we also do this here at Messaging Lab, are able to introduce innovation in a strategic way that focuses on the bottom line, what are the economics of integrating new technology, and in our case, we're talking about biotech, and do it in a systematic way and being able to bring this up on the board level. This is something that Richard mentioned in this episode, is that these decisions need to be made in a thoughtful way, but up from the top, so that then the mandate goes all the way through the organization to have this shift in being able to use new technologies to increase revenue.
Yeah. And just to go back to the top of the episode where I mentioned the report, I mean, this report is really the third report from big consulting firms. And McKinsey put out a series of reports about the disruption that biotech is going to bring to all industries. BCG put out a series of reports that we also helped work on about the impact of biotech on all industries. And this one, I appreciated the way they did it because at Capgemini, what they did was they interviewed leaders across industry sectors. And some of the numbers were just really, to me, stunning because number one, most of the people they interviewed expected that there would be some type of disruption based on the adoption of biotech. Half the organizations that they interviewed believe that these kind of disruptive approaches, meaning using biology as a technology, would be required to reach net zero. And then really to me, the most surprising stat was most organizations, like 96% of the organizations that were involved in this, are already pursuing some kind of biotech solution. On the other side of it is that there's still a lot of barriers to adoption. There's still limited market awareness. And then there's not really enough people to help companies understand how to do this and how they should implement this, which is, again, something that we do here at Messaging Lab, where we help drive collaboration and orchestrate the creation of these value chains between big players and small ones to make this difference.
Yeah, there are barriers to adoption until they're not. So that's the thing, is that there might be a barrier today, but it's gone tomorrow. So who at these large companies are paying attention to when those barriers drop so they can adopt innovation quickly? And so again, firms like Capgemini, like ours, are looking at the moment in which these barriers drop so that these larger organizations can act on it with innovative partners. I mean, we're not developing the technology in our firms, but we know a lot of great organizations, many, of course, that we've interviewed on this podcast, that are working on dropping those barriers. So it's super great to talk to Richard. I mean, again, I think we could have him on again as Capgemini continues to support companies, not only in the UK, they seem to be working with organizations around the world. And when we see him again, see how things progress, perhaps the next report that comes out, we're happy to help them. Capgemini, you heard it here first. We're here to help you with any reports that you need to write. From our perspective, sitting here in Brooklyn, New York, looking at the world from here. But any other parting thoughts on your end, Karl?
Yeah, I just want to say that Richard mentioned in passing that Capgemini has worked with the World Economic Forum. And just a quick shout out to the World Economic Forum, because earlier in the year, and we'll put this in the show notes, they had talked about storytelling and the importance of storytelling to explain the bioeconomy in a way that everyone could understand. And our friend Natse Chiesa, who had been on a short episode many months ago, she was part of that effort as well. And so given the fact that an organization that is as big and is as well regarded as the World Economic Forum understands that biotech is a thing, but it's still one of these technologies that most people don't understand, and helping people to understand it is only going to help drive adoption faster. So that's my shout out to Capgemini and the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, World Economic Forum, great shout out. If anyone from the World Economic Forum is listening, we're happy to help you with your biotech messaging too. That's all we do on this podcast. So hello, or just listen to the podcast. You can get inspired. But thank you so much for listening to the Grow Everything podcast. Please reach out if you have any questions. Call us, email us, comment on our post. We're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube. We're out there. We're out there in the wild, in the digital wild. So please reach out. I actually have this question for our audience because one of the things I was thinking is there an industry that biotech isn't touching? Because we believe that's touching every industry. So if there's an industry you think that biology is not touching and is isolated from, let us know and we'll see if we can spin it to where biology is supporting it. Or maybe you discover it and it's just not a topic for us. But I just wanted to put that out there.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's the pod.
Yes, that's the pod. End scene.